Good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to make sure we were on live. Good afternoon. I am Nicole Matthews with the Minnesota Indian Women Sexual Assault Coalition. Happy to be here on our last webinar Wednesday on Where's the Love. I missed last week's conversation, but I'm excited for our conversation this week, and hoping that you all who are joining us live on Facebook or who are watching will contribute to the conversation. Please add comments or questions on Facebook, and we will keep an eye on that and try to respond to them and bring them into our conversation as we move along. I would love to just open it up for everybody to give a brief introduction. Christine?
Bonjour, everybody. Giwatayashi Kindigo, Magizi and Dodame, Gawa Babaganikagish and Don Jiba. I might be chopping in and out. My internet is saying it's unstable, but I'm here. I'm Giwatayashi from Eagle Clan. I live over here in the White Earth Reservation. I'm Christine Davidson with the Minnesota Indian Women Sexual Assault Coalition, and I'm always happy to be talking about the work in this way. So welcome, everybody. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Christine. Rebecca?
I'm Bystanders. Good day. Hi, I'm Rebecca. I'm also with the MIWSAC team. I'm smudging this good energy into our space while we talk about bystanders today. And where is the love, right? So a part of my work at MIWSAC, I joined the team doing sex trafficking in Indian country in Alaska. And a part of that work is talking about how do we create healthy communities? How do we participate in them and be a healthy bystander in a world where it's really difficult to do so? So yeah, I'm happy to be here. And I'm excited for the long weekend. That too, ma'am.
Me too. Thank you. Jolene?
Bonjour and welcome, everyone. I'm Jolene Engelking. I am also with MIWSAC. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here today. I think that these conversations over the past month have been just bubbling up in all different parts of our circles. And I think that diving deep into this today to talk about power and leadership and what can we do as community, I think it's going to be really powerful. And I really hope it's just the beginning of some great work that we can all do together.
Thank you. And thank you to our interpreters, Sarika and Dresden. We so appreciate you being here with us every week. Yeah, we really love it. Thank you so much. All right, so this week our theme is around when we think about bystanders and we think about sexual abuse, we want to specifically talk this week about people with power and influence. For example, political leaders, spiritual leaders, people who hold power within our community. And we want to talk about some of the nuances to addressing that type of violence. And, you know, I think many of us probably have experienced a time when we were called out, or in today's language, maybe canceled by somebody or somewhere, right? For addressing violence in our communities. Maybe it was for talking about a spiritual leader who was perpetrating violence, or talking about a tribal leader who was perpetrating violence, and received some backlash in our own communities from that. So let's talk about, I want to open it up first to talk about what are the differences with addressing violence and you know, bystander intervention when we are talking about people that hold that influence and that power in our community?
Hi, yeah, I'd love to answer that. So I think the different, at the core, just making I statements and speaking from my own journey, it is scary. And it takes a lot of healthy risk and bravery to see, or, you know, as advocates, we work with folks in a confidential manner. Babe, sorry about that. Working from home, man. But it takes a lot of bravery especially when you're working with an individual and you know all the long history that can come along with harm doers, and to stand up, do that confidential work as a professional advocate, but then also be a part of the community, and seeing someone with so much influence have followers and popularity and all of those things. I think there's a huge chasm between doing professional advocacy and then being a part of the community and trying to raise up the, what am I looking for? The profile of healthy relationships instead of the performative pretendianism of a healthy relationship. It takes a lot of guts, and it depends on the community that you're in. You know, we have to do safety planning when we do some of this work. So anyway, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think that there's so many different ways that we could go with some of this conversation. But I just keep thinking about how victim blaming is something that just keeps coming up in communities, right? And then part of it's like, why didn't they just come forward? But I mean, part of what we're seeing is when people do come forward, do tell their story, do name their perpetrator, do all of this, there is a huge risk that comes to that. And so how can we, as community members, as relatives, be able to speak up? But when there is the real risk, and how are we able to balance that? I mean, we want to say that, just be brave and name it, and, the truth will come out. And we've also seen in many communities how that can really go. And so I'm really excited to just kind of like dive deeper into this with folks and think about what strategies people have seen work and what are some ideas that we can all be trying for these different types of, power and leadership misguidance. I don't know what the right word is then. So.
Yeah. So there's no roadmap, right? And there's a long history of, I don't think we can have these conversations without keeping like the historical context of having things stripped away from us and trying to get them back. And I think when it comes to like the people who are in leadership positions of varying sorts in our communities, a lot of it has to do with that struggle to try to get back our rituals, our language, our cultural practices, our ability to care for one another as family members in our community, right? And when you've had such a long struggle trying to get those things back, I think a couple of things can happen. One, we can become vulnerable to the people who have that information or those skill sets, or that, if we're talking about spiritual practitioners, if they got the mojo, right? If they got the mojo, it can be real easy to try to, I don't know, let it go or overlook it or give a free pass because nobody else knows how to do that particular ceremony. So what are we going to do? Right. And I think so it's a very real struggle in very real time sometimes in our communities. And also there's a cost, right? Sometimes it's a being canceled or by human beings, but there's a spiritual cost too, or maybe there is and maybe there isn't, but it can be a perceived spiritual cost inside of me. Like, who am I? Just little old me. Who am I to say this person, to make, a statement about somebody causing harm? Like, who am I to say that when they are the only ones who can do this particular thing, right? So I think it just gets real messy, real fast. And we can feel powerless to say something because of the attacks that we receive around us. And so I don't know, the struggle is real, I would just add one quick thing too about like, part of what I believe would be helpful is that if more and more people had access to certain kinds of information, right? Like, I think I've heard a saying that our ways are sacred, they're not secret, right? And I think we have learned to push a lot of our ways and practices and ceremonies and rituals underground because we had to protect them. And so then that can become this idea about keeping things secret, right? But it's really not about that. And so having more people know that information, know what to go out and harvest when you have a cold, the more people know that, the better, right? So I don't know, those are just some things I think about.
I think that's a good point. And I think, because of the fact that things were kept secret for so long out of preservation and necessity, we also, sometimes believe there's only one, person that can pray, right? We go to only certain people to maybe open an event or pray or do certain things. And so that puts us, I think that puts any community at bigger risk when we are only relying on that one person. And there is a real threat, like you said, there's community backlash, and there's spiritual, individual spiritual harm if you don't now have access to your own to those practices or those cultural ways. And I think I have seen both people being harmed by the community or backlash for speaking up, but also for not speaking up, right? And so, and I think as advocates and those of us who do this work, we are always trying to think of ways to safely speak up and address violence in our communities. And also, I think it's important to talk about sometimes it's not safe, right? And so then what do? How do we address this? And what does bystander intervention look like when there is that threat, and maybe sometimes when we need to not be so public in our in addressing it or calling it out? Then what do we do? Thoughts?
One of the things I'd love to chime in, because it just goes back to our title, and which is why I was so excited to participate in this conversation. Where is the love? And this has been the theme of all of, this is our 4th week, all of November for Native Month. If we love our sons, brothers, relatives, sisters, uncles, if we love our friends and family, do we love them out of just loyalty, out of the history of survivalism, where no matter what, I got your back because we're surviving together? Because that was a thing, right? And it still is. But then are we still there that I know you're being abusive, you've done harm, I've seen it, I know what I'm hearing on the phone, seeing on your phone, seeing in the community. I love you so much out of just loyalty that I'm going to have your back? Or do I love you enough to say, hold on a second, in private, what are you doing? You're doing harm. You're sexual violence, domestic violence, or purchasing or selling and trafficking. To me, that tough love, I think, is more authentic than allowing someone we care about to just do harm. So it doesn't always have to be like a public campaign. Sometimes it is, I guess. And then other times it's a very intimate conversation to help them heal and restore or transform. Right? So.
I just was thinking, well, while you're talking, Rebecca, sometimes it's not like something like super. So there's a spectrum of violence that we can experience, right? And so the way that we address it can be on a spectrum as well, right? Because sometimes it can just be like, talking to a relative about, why are you bringing alcohol to a party where there's young folks, right? Something along those lines, like naming it. It doesn't have to be like super over and out there all the time. I mean, it'd be nice in my perspective, but also in real time, in real community, just making a different kind of accountability to one another as relatives to just be like, you just shouldn't even be at a party where there's young folks, or whatever the example is. I'm just using that as an example of, we can call it out or call it in, whatever it is, in gentle and loving ways early on and often, and we normalize a new conversation, right? Talking to both our, talking to all genders of our children in a way that honors them and where they're at and what the things that they're curious about and are going to go out and learn in the world, but just how to be a good relative to one another, right? That's what made me think of when you're talking.
I love when you talk, Christine. What I keep thinking about is also this idea that, so for me, I've always struggled with what is the concept of community. I've talked a little bit about this before with, some of the folks on the call, but I'm coming from, like, I grew up in a town where, my parents moved there when I was little, but it's one of those towns where it takes like 20 years for you to become like part of the community. And then the town, all the communities I did advocacy in, I was new there. And so, I'm new and, I was supposed to be setting up, someone to come in and do like lead the prayer. And I trust that the people I ask are telling me the right, who would be a good person, but then I set it up and I've never met this person before. How do I know all this kind of stuff? And I think that that's one of the really hard things is that for folks who have lived and like who are deeply embedded in community, it can seem easier. But as somebody who's coming from the outside in many situations, I sometimes feel like I struggle. Like when we're talking about people in power, I don't always know who's in power and I don't always know the backstories of things. And so that's just, it's a risky place to kind of be in. And I just wanted to name that because I'm sure that there's lots of folks. We live in a transient society where people are going from here to there and we're trying to do good work in communities that aren't our, communities of origin. So.
And also I think, Jolene, when you were talking, I was thinking sometimes there's a benefit to being outside the community, right? Because there's less perceived and real threat when you're not I don't want to say invested because I still feel invested, but when you don't have as much attachment or connection to that community. For instance, many of our coalition members have at times asked us to come up and facilitate, whether it's a community forum or something that addresses violence in their communities, because it's much scarier for them to address harm against the harm doers when they have to live in that community, right? We get to leave, we get to come up there and say the hard things, and then we get to leave. And so I think sometimes there can be a real benefit to someone outside of the community who can speak truth in ways that those who are there cannot.
I also think hand in hand with that is a development or a curiosity about readiness when a community is ready to do that work internally. And while it's nice to have an outside organization come in and facilitate a conversation, the end of the day is that we still are here in our community dealing with the same stuff. So how do we enhance our own skill level and how do we support one another in having those conversations in a good way, right? And that is freaking scary and it's difficult, it's painful, and it's just so important to remember that a person who's causing harm isn't hurting every single person around them. So it can be so hard for the person who hasn't been hurt by somebody to say, this cannot be possible. They never hurt me. They never did this. And so it just is, it's really complicated, right? And so one of the things I was thinking about is how do we grow spaces where we can come together and just have these conversations. I don't have all the words. All I have is this feeling of what does it look like for us to even, we're having this conversation in Zoom, as a coalition, as members and the staff of a coalition, but could just me and a few others in community who are seeing this happen over and over again, can we do the same thing? Can we go meet up at the center? Can somebody come over and have coffee and some bannock and we have a conversation? Can we address it together one another to see what some possibilities are? Because we have an actual tangible responsibility when we know something to say something. I don't know. In terms of thinking about like spiritual practitioners who come into our community to do a ceremony, right? Like in Anishinaabe country, we have real specific ceremonies for specific things, right? And there's only a certain number of people who know those ceremonies from beginning to end, the protocol, the spiritual protocol, the community protocol, the gift protocol, the actual prayers, okay? And so in real time, it can be real challenging when there's a minimal amount of people who know those ceremonies. And if they are somebody who is causing harm or using that position of power and knowledge to extract resources from the people, be it money or gifts, or, there's a lot of money involved sometimes with bringing somebody in to do a ceremony in our community. I mean, that's just the facts, right? But there's the resources of the people too, the extraction of the people. And it can be sexual violence, but it can be other things too. And so can we have a different practice in community of naming that? And I don't know what the word is, just having a conversation about who we bring in and who we don't. I don't know, like it's dangerous to do that, but if we don't start somewhere, we're going to keep bringing in people who are causing harm.
Christine, I'm going to ask it. Can I ask you a question? So when I've been in community, it happened a couple times where people have countered, like when we're trying to talk about, like, we kept hearing about, a couple people who kept, abusing and abusing and abusing, right? And I was told that we should keep quiet about it because they are one of the few good ones. And if we bring that forward, that it's a further act of colonization, basically, because there's so few Native men who are, educated or, this or that we're actually causing more harm to the community by naming it. How would you respond to that as somebody?
Well, there's no one answer to that question, I suppose, right? Part of that is, holy smokes, like that's a pretty high cost to have somebody be sexually violated or to be spiritually violated just because they're one of the very few people who know that particular thing. Like, shame on us that we're withholding knowledge in that way from one another in the first place. Shame on the person who has the knowledge and is choosing to use that knowledge to cause harm. Like, that's the part that I think we need to name more explicitly. I think to let them off the hook that easily is a harmful practice, in that will not get us anywhere. It'll just leave more doorways for this person to either come back into our community or go to others and cause harm. I don't have the answer of how to respond to it other than that. Others?
And let's not forget, man, when we're talking about domestic violence, sexual abuse, chronic sexual abusers, trafficking sellers or buyers, like the whole gamut, right? All of the harm doers. There's a tactical measure. There's tactical preparation where we talked about it earlier. There's the folks that get the charm and the medicine that they're conveying, the good words, the words of the microphone. That's tactical. It's like mass gaslighting. While others who are the individuals that are surviving and getting the other side of that coin, they aren't believed because of that mass gaslighting. And that's a really big problem, right? And that goes down to the spiritual, Jillian, what you were asking too. That's the first thing that popped into my head. I got my pen out and I wrote it down. Those lovely conveyor gaslighters are really good at what they do. And now they're doing it on a grand mass, no accountability scale online, on top of in the little communities, right? It's hard.
It is hard. My brain is like spinning in so many different directions right now. And one of the things I was thinking, a few things I was thinking of. One thing was years ago when MIWSAC started, we were talking about creating a list of people who've caused harm, or a list of safe spiritual leaders, right? Because it is such a huge need in our community. And we should have a way to tell people who is safe to go to, right? And that there's a lot of stuff around that too, right? Like, who gets to say who's on that list, and how do we know that those people are safe to go to? Just like I think about when we go, we do our solidarity shawl, honor songs at powwows. How do we know who's a safe drum group to go to, or who hasn't caused harm, or is, currently causing harm, committing, acts of gender-based violence? Like, how do we know And there's no list, right? Like there's no like, here's all the safe people. And I remember a spiritual leader telling us, cautioned us against creating that list of safe spiritual leaders, because he said, those that really do have power will get their names on that list. Their name, even though they're causing harm, they're like, there are people that really have it, and they will find a way to get their names on the list. And so, so we've never kept the list. And, we all have, you talk about like, well, I would go to this person, and let's just start using our, our women leaders more. And, but it's, I think when we are thinking about people in positions of power, people who have influence in their community, and people who are in a more sort of public role in our community, there's also real harms for, like people are afraid of being sued for slander if you call out something, for someone who hasn't been. People are always like, well, we can't say that because they haven't been prosecuted, they don't have this, they don't have that, right? So we can't say it, we can't name it, we can't talk about it. So what is that line? What do we do about that? How do we address violence? How do we address those people?
So I've had conversations a lot of times about that slander business, right? And from my perspective, so, okay, got a couple of things because y'all said a lot, right? I was like, oh. So I don't know if I necessarily have a list of safe practitioners, right? Spiritual practitioners. I have a list of people that have caused harm, or that people have personally disclosed to me that people have caused harm. Not necessarily spiritual practitioners, but just generally in this line of work, we hear a lot, right? And that's not something that, I don't tell anybody about who's on the list or whatever. What I do is, if somebody asks me about a specific person, I'm going to tell the truth. I'm not protecting perpetrators. I'm certainly not protecting the ones that have harmed me, that I know are continuing to harm others, right? But I don't think it's a weapon to wield. I think it could be a tool of love if we thought about it differently, right? I don't know how to word it exactly, but why are we protecting people who keep causing harm? This is a question. In terms of slander, to me, it would be worth the risk, because then that person would have to go and prove it in a court of law that they didn't cause the harm. So maybe that's a tactic, right? Then go ahead and prove it, because guess what? I bet you the truth is going to come out if it went public, and more people would come forward. So that's just my thoughts on that business. But this thing about why we don't share or say things to one another is what trips me up. Like, why do I keep my little list of harm doers to myself? And I guess I have lots of reasons for that. If I were to put that out, it would be a storm of drama, not just in my own community, but communities all across this country. We work on a national level with this. I mean, there's people all over the country doing this. So it's scary. And I don't want to throw people under the bus. What I want is for us to be healthy as a community, and to be able to provide circles of support around both those who are experiencing the violence. But if there are those who are committing violence for whatever reason, whatever excuse you came up with in your head that you decided it was okay to cause harm to somebody, if you come forward and say, I have effed up bad, I want to make it right from a spiritual perspective, I want to make this right, you will have a circle of support around you. I guarantee it, because we all want what is good and just and free from violence, right? We all want to just live our lives, raise our kids, and go sledding and come home and have hot chocolate, right? Like, so I believe that there is an opportunity for us if we were bold enough to just talk about it with one another, which is why we're here, right? Right.
I think there's way more. Thank you, Christine. That's so true. And there's so, the word power is so wishy-washy, because it can be very bad. but empowerment can be very good and healing. And, you know, folks that have done harm, you know, are probably scared shitless to come forward because they've done harm. But if we create, you know, that decolonizing, like the guidelines, and we can post that in the chat too, our guidelines that drive our work about decolonizing and keeping those sacred values present. You know, who's perfect? I don't know a perfect human. And if you've done harm because of trauma or addiction or tragedy in your life, it's okay to come forward and own it as a part of that healing process, instead of pushing it down to have a perception of yourself as a perfect human. Because guess what? None of us are perfect. So I think some folks that in their past have done bad things might be afraid from the backlash. So they just keep on keeping on. Where in the truth in the heart, where the spirit see everything, authenticity, you know, you come forward and ask for help and want to be a part of the change, you'll be embraced, just like Christine, you shared, fully embraced. And I'm thinking about some of the men in our work, not just tribal, non-natives too, white men, people of color that have come forward and done this work and own some of their mistakes of the past. They're such powerful voices to talk to our youth, right? So I think there might be some fear involved of coming forward, but that's definitely not the majority. I think some people are just hiding behind power and control. But thank you for saying all that, Christine. Really good. Yeah.
And so, because part of this, I mean, this is part of why this whole conversation kind of came to be is a discussion around like almost who gets to decide when somebody who has caused harm is able to do the work again, or to be in spaces, or we're okay with it. And there was a comment within the chat that says, you know, this isn't always true, right? Like, is it always possible for people to come forward and for us to be like circling them with support? Like, and this one says, I believe some people should never be allowed back in after continuing to cause so much harm. And so who gets and so that's where I kind of struggle, is like almost who gets to decide and to what extent and all this sort of stuff. And yeah, it's just hard.
It's the community. The community should get to decide, not any one person or any group of persons, right? But when we collectively communicate in a loving and transparent way with one another about what being responsible to one another as relatives and human beings looks and feels like, it's like that web of life, right? It's just like on a spider web. When you pull on one part of the web, the whole web moves. And that's what it's like for our people. And so, you know, there are people who, I mean, I've been harmed by some people, and I've had a range of feelings about how I feel about what justice looks like in terms of the harm that I've experienced or the harm that these people have done. And at the end of the day, the criminal justice system wasn't enough. My harm doer did their time, got out, moved back into community, and I believe is likely still causing harm, right? So that was not the justice that worked for me. My justice is to be here having these conversations and living free from violence right now. That's where my justice is, that I get to say things out loud, right? And then there was something else I was gonna, Rebecca, when you were talking about the harm doer, so I worked with somebody who had started to write a letter to the person that they caused harm to. And they came to me, and this was over tobacco and lots of conversation, and said, well, I'm so afraid of giving the letter to them because what will they do? Right. And so that it was a real fear, because they are a human being with a spirit of their own who knows that they hurt somebody and wants to make it right, and is just at the cliff of the threshold of reaching out to the person. And all I knew what to say at that time is that you can't determine how that person responds. You don't get to say if they accept it, if they want to speak with you, if they will read your letter, if they tell you to jump off a freaking cliff. You don't get to say. But what matters is that your spirit is doing the work, that you are owning the harm inside of your own spirit and putting that out into the universe transforms everything. I believe that to be true. If there were people who had the courage to do that work even a little bit for a little while, it could transform so much for our people. I pray for it.
I totally agree. I think a couple of things, like I think, you know, Christine, when you said it's the community that gets to decide, I think that's right? Like we need to have conversations in community about what is accountability and how do you make amends after you've caused harm? What does amends look like? Not just to that individual, but when you harm someone in that way, you're harming the entire community because you're harming the trust we held in you, the belief that we had in you, like, and we've had to mourn the loss of the gifts and the talents and that you brought to the community, right? So all of that. So how do you really make amends, not only to the person that you harmed, to their family, but to the community? And what does it look like to truly step into that and to do something different, right? To make amends and repair the harm, but then to like take it a step farther, to try and, you know, do something better moving forward, I think is so important. And we don't have a lot of those conversations. Most of our conversations are really about the criminal justice system. And, you know, I sit on the predatory offender work group to talk about how to change the predatory offender registration. And it's really challenging as we move towards, you know, looking at what could it look like to move away from the criminal justice system and like over criminalization of our people, and also wanting to protect our community and to hold harm doers accountable. Like, it's really complicated, and we have to have a lot of really hard conversations.
Yeah, and I think that like, so sometimes I don't know, I start to think about, you know, like panels and like state run like committees and things like that. But like thinking about like what, and I'm sure people have tried this. I've heard about people trying something similar in communities where, you know, can we just have a panel of folks, including, you know, like elders and women and advocates coming together to be like, to help determine when, like, what would that look like to have people be like, you know, this is the harm I caused. I want to make amends. What is a public way for me to do this? And so what could those sorts of like reparations almost panel or whatever look like in communities, or as another form of justice? And how could we try that? And how do you balance that then with the criminal legal system and all that kind of stuff? And so I think there's just so many different ways that people have been exploring and that we need to continue to dive deeper into.
Yeah, and it's like a multifaceted thing, right? So the question always remains, what does the survivor or the person who experienced the harm, what do they want the most, right? And it's never just a one answer deal, right? You may think it's one thing, but in reality, the wounds are so complicated and deep and far reaching that and long lasting, lifelong. Like I'm 51 years old, I'm still dealing with this stuff, right? So it's lifelong. But that's what I'm saying is it's not a one and done. That's why you can't just like get convicted. If you even report, if you're convicted, which, you know, we know that doesn't really happen, and you go to jail and serve your time, does that mean you're just like free and clear now? Right. And I think we've kind of agreed that that's not enough, right? Because they're not really doing the spiritual work necessary to make it right with themselves, with their own, right? Because the amends have to be also for your own spirit and our spirit helpers that all of us have. That work needs to be done as well. It's not really a one thing. I don't know. It's exciting. It's scary. It's possible. You know, I believe that it is possible. There are some courageous people out there who, I mean, I've worked with quite a few people over the years who have done some really amazing work on themselves and trying to make it right with the people that they've hurt. So it does happen. The more and more it happens, especially in our own communities where we can model it for one another, that's going to have a ripple effect ongoing.
The other thing that it made me think of, and maybe because this book is sitting in front of my face on my desk, but when you were talking about someone writing a letter of apology or acknowledging the harm they had caused, right? obviously the majority of survivors are never going to get that letter ever, right? And I was thinking, and I know this is a little off topic, and also connected, but I kept looking at this book, The Apology by Eve Ensler, where she wrote the apology letter that she would have wanted from her harm doer. And what a gift to herself, right? To write, this is the apology I wanted from you. And I never got it. And I believe she wrote after that person had passed. And I think that's also, when we're thinking about healing, sometimes we have to do those things for ourselves, right? Because I think also when that kind of harm, when we experience that kind of trauma, it takes it's a process to heal from that. And there's multiple layers of healing, of undoing, of even having to forgive ourselves because we blame ourselves, right? And often, and sometimes the community blames us too. And so I think there's just so many different layers of healing that we have to go through and experience when we've experienced trauma.
That takes me back to, the theme of our month of where is the love? We talked about holding the people we love accountable for the harm doing. And then I love that, Nicole, because where is the love has to include ourselves, because you're right. A lot of the people that have done us harm are going to be charming and lovely to the world. And it's behind closed doors that we know the truth. And to find it as individuals, but with each other, because we are here together with each other, supporting each other and finding our own people on the healing journey that sometimes can subsidize that love and that apology and making it okay when our perps will just never show up like that. And that's a huge piece too, because then if we're in this group together and we're supporting each other as survivors, then we're going to understand that big, popular, famous, political, powerful person that's doing harm, we may envelope and put our arms around the survivor and say, you know what, I don't care how popular they are. This is what I see, and bring them into our healing circle of the people that never get the apology. And that's huge too.
So we have about 15 minutes left, and I really want maybe to move next to think about what are the next steps? What does it really mean when we think of bystander intervention or speaking our truth, or whatever we want to call it, right? Or expressing our love. What does that look like? And what tools are needed in our communities for our people to really be able to do this, whether it's on their own or in community with other people, or how to support other people when we are talking about addressing harm by people in power, our spiritual leaders, our tribal leaders.
Can I just bring it home to where this wasn't the whole thing? It was a slice of the pie. Mary Catherine Nagel said, a sliver of the full moon. And this was Philadelphia. It was over a month ago that we knew that there was sexual violence on a subway in Philly. And I live in Pennsylvania, so this is close to home, where over 45 people had their phones out and were recording bullying, sexual harassment, and then unfortunately a rape. Did not call 911. So I'm just going to bring it home to say, don't ever be the dude or the chick or the chica that's going to have a phone. Call 911. Take the healthy risk to be someone's angel support system, whatever we want to call it. If there's something like that, let's change our social norm of videotaping with our phone. I said taping. My kids don't even know what that word means anymore, but cell phone recording, and just be the change. Take the healthy risk, but keep yourself safe along that journey, because it looks different at the gas station on the res. It looks different in a subway, and it looks different on the street, right? But just take the healthy risk for those easier, because that is easier to call 911 when we're in an urban environment than it is to deal with a harm doer in our family and community, because that comes with a lot more. So I would say hurt people, and healed people heal people. So we have a choice to make. And I guess that's my final words. Choose well.
So Anna, thank you for that, Rebecca. It's weird to follow that because I'm just going to do a big segue or like a big deterrent from that, but that's just, it's just very powerful to think about. But what I keep thinking about is, within communities, when big things happen, especially, high profile sexual assault or whatever term you want to use, people are like, oh, we need to come in and do trainings. We need to have people come in and train. And to be clear, I'm a trainer for a living for the most part, right? But at the same point, I think, and I believe, knowledge is power. I was a kid of the 90s, all of that. But we need to go beyond trainings. It's 2021. It's soon to be 2022. Yes, trainings will still be useful, but what kind of action can we take? So, and just thinking about like, as MIWSAC, I'm just thinking like as us within our small role, like, we would be able to probably go in with communities and help, with, hey, there's a lot of sexual harassment within a workplace, within, a powerful business. We can be helping, like try to figure out how do you shift policy and how do you shift social norms? And I think that's what we need to be, diving more, not more into, but we need to be diving into that. And also like there's when things come up, one voice, one survivor coming forward is powerful. And it can start that ripple effect of more and more people having those conversations and more people coming forward. I've seen it within the past year. One person comes forward and then all of a sudden 20 survivors come out of the woodwork being like, he did this to me too. And so how can we leverage our collective power within our communities? And it's hard because there's gonna be times where people have fought to their darndest to try to bring something forward. And the community still seems to just like turn, like just to ignore them. But we need to keep trying because at some point the time is right. And I think that's another thing is that not giving up and using the different ways that we have, be it different doors, different windows, different side avenues we might have to always just keep trying. And it's exhausting. And we've all had those moments where not wanting to give up because we're not going to give up, but we felt it at times. And so, yeah, I think that just exploring all those different ways that are just beyond training.
Yeah, I feel like I feel like there. So if we're thinking about who we're asking to say an opening prayer, or if we're inviting somebody to our community to do a particular ceremony, or we travel to another community to participate in a ceremony there, and when we hear information, so when you said one survivor is powerful, that is enough. When one person says this person caused harm, I'm going to believe them every time. It may take a little while to reconcile mentally, emotionally, maybe even spiritually. Like, it's hard to believe if I've not experienced harm from this person. Holy smokes, what? And it's a firestorm in your body of trying to process it, right? But if we come from the position every single time to believe the victim every single time, the first time they utter the words, we transform the trajectory of the journey, right? And the more and more people who feel comfortable saying something in real time, the more and more we model it, the stronger we become in saying it in real time. It's hard to do. I don't know. I think somebody mentioned it earlier about going straight to the person and saying, this is, it's hard to just say the words, right? Like, I've heard that you've done this. I think you better do your work, and maybe this isn't the space for you, right? Until you can figure something out. But we don't all have the the skill or the safety to be able to do that every single time. So what does it look like to have a support system in place that isn't about gossip or trying to cause harm? It's really about trying to elevate the safety of the community. And we get to do that. We should be doing that. Why would we not do that? Why would we continue to let a harm doer come in and keep raping people? It just blows my mind. So thinking of it from that perspective, that person, no matter what skill or what mojo they have, they're not above the law. They're not above spiritual law, right? They might get away with it legally because of our criminal justice system being what it is. But let me tell you, you're not above spiritual law, and we have a responsibility to one another. So let's develop a practice around. A coworker of mine, we were at a doings, and they were going to pass tobacco and ask the person who was going to do the ceremony if they had ever sexually assaulted anybody. And let me tell you, the women in that circle were the ones that attacked this person the most, right? Like, how dare you ask that? But guess what? That is so oppressive to think about it, that we're trying to protect. It's perfectly, if somebody is not causing harm, they're going to be like, that is amazing that you asked me that question, because I would love it if somebody asked me that. That means that they're thoughtful and want to protect our people, right? That is something that could transform everything too. We should and could be able to say that. Those are a couple of thoughts I have.
Can I add? That was brilliant. Can I just add? So some sassy academic, I don't know what, bougie words, right? There's two words that come to mind, and we talked about this earlier today. So there's discernment, big fancy word. And that just means leaning back and taking the time to evaluate the facts and being flexible with its outcome of the facts that are laid on you. And then the other one that comes after some discernment when we're talking about this stuff is dissociation. And that's a really fancy academic word for what you believe to be true with all of your spirit, your heart, your mind, and your experience turns out not to be true. So we have to have the discernment to understand the dissociation of someone we loved. We follow them on Facebook. We post about them. We join them when they're on the mic. We're clapping and excited. Then to be flexible enough to understand that what we thought was real isn't real. And being authentic enough to understand some of these folks with this power and control and popularity aren't what they seem. Or we go to an altar and we follow a medicine man or healer, and then understand that there is a survivor coming forward, that we have the discernment to believe them. We just lean back and take our time before we cast judgment and join some bullying campaign against a possible survivor. Takes guts. Anyway, that's all I got. Thank you.
It does take guts. You guys are brilliant. You guys touched on all pieces, the individual level, the community level, policy, systems, all of that is important when we think about bystander intervention, when we think about how to truly show up and practice love in our communities. We need, years ago, MIWSAC developed a policy for what to do if a perpetrator shows up in our space. And we find out about it. And there's an entire procedure internally for how we would address that. And it is with the community women, with our elders, that it's addressed. And so, it's about the really practical, tangible things and steps that we can do. It's also about being brave. It's also about, like you said, Christine, if someone comes to me and says that they've been harmed by someone, I'm going to believe them. I remember having a conversation with my teenage son who watches a lot of the backlash videos from sports heroes that talk about, how people are just lying about sexual assault. And he said, well, so do you just believe a woman if she tells you she's been raped? And I said, well, absolutely. Absolutely, I'm going to believe her, because one, it's not my job I'm not the police. It's not my job to investigate her. And two, I know the reality that most victims don't lie. They don't lie about that. They may retract their statement because they're scared, because they've received backlash. But 9 times out of 10, she's telling the truth. And I also, he's a teenage boy and impressionable, and he still listens to his mom sometimes. And I also told him too that if anybody ever trusts you enough to tell you that, you better believe her too. Because it's really important if someone has that kind of trust in you to tell them you believe them. And I think that's, all of us need to have that, to be able to believe victims. Even if that's not our experience of that harm doer, that does not mean it didn't happen. It means that that perpetrator, that harm doer, did not maybe commit that act of violence towards us for whatever reason, does not mean they didn't commit that act of violence against another person. So this has been another beautiful, rich, amazing conversation. And I'm so grateful that we had, this month to really dig into all the different pieces around bystanders and really look at how do we show up for our communities, how do we show up for each other, and really how do we show up from a place of love for our communities. Any final thoughts? We have 1 minute left.
My final thought is an invitation to never let this conversation be done, right? Like, we invite you to join us in an ongoing virtual or in person over coffee and bannock, whatever it takes. It's ongoing. It's a practice. We're working a muscle of figuring out how to do it better and different and healthier, right? Because there is no one easy answer. It's hard work. So we invite you to come join us, come be a part of it, add your creativity, add your fire, all the things. Okay, miigwech.
All I got is ditto. Ditto.
Yeah, I'd say that all I have to add is really this idea of how are we finding balance between the dark and the light and all that kind of stuff, but also we all bring our own unique strengths to, Rebecca, Christine, Nicole, and I, we're all so different in ourselves, but we each bring something unique. And that's what's going to be in your community as well, when we're trying to figure out how to best come together and show that love, because we're all bringing our unique strengths. And just because something may not be what you're good at, you know what, there's going to be amazing people in your community who can help support you through that. And so you don't have to be the be all end all. We're in this together. So
thank you all, and thank you everybody who's watching. And yes, please, let's continue this conversation. We don't have all the answers, but we have lots of questions and are really, honored to be in community with all of you. So, miigwech.